Hello, Peter4790 here, Cyrus, and welcome to another rendition of Sirus Gaming Corner, a gaming podcast where I, Surfers1390, and Force Reviews talk about various gaming topics. From old games to new games, everything is fair game as far as discussion goes. So how are you guys' evening going so far?
I'm doing well. Always a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, it's good to be back. It's been about a month since we did our last podcast.
Yeah, technically, yeah.
Something like that.
So for today's topic, we're gonna talk about the Tales series, which is personally probably my favorite, or at least second favorite gaming series of all time. My favorite and second favorite always switches around.
Same for me. It's honestly either my favorite or second favorite, with only struggling with Shin Megami Tensei.
In terms of the Tales games, for this podcast, we're probably just going to talk about the 3D Tales games. Just because, personally, I haven't played many of the 2D ones. The only one I've played was Fantasia on the PS1. Not the GBA, the not bad version, apparently. But yeah, I haven't beaten the PS1 version, so... And that's the only one I've played. That's probably the reason why we're only going to talk about the 3D ones, since we have played a good amount of the 3D ones. I think
I'm going to be the least out of the three that have played the least amount of 3D ones. So, sorry about anybody watching, but I'll comment when I can. But there are some of them that I have not beaten, and we'll probably get to the reason for that when we get to it.
I guess we should first start out which ones we played and beaten of the 3D ones. For me, I played Tales Symphonia, Symphonia 2, Vesperia, Abyss, Legendia, Xillia, Xillia 2, Zestiria, and Berseria. I think that's pretty much 3D Tales games. That was released in the West, at least. Oh yeah, I played Tales of Heartstar, but I haven't finished that, so take that as you may.
Yeah, those are all the exact Tales games that I've beaten as well. I don't think you mentioned Tales of the Abyss, but
I think I did, yeah.
Did you? Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. I played all those, and for me, I played about maybe half of Heartstar ish, and I put it down because I got kind of bored. I know it's kind of a contentious opinion, but I'm sorry, it got kind of boring. But I guess not. Well, if we talk about that, we talk about it. But
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
anyways, yeah.
Heartstar, yeah.
Yeah, I think that game's kind of boring. I didn't finish it either.
Vice is not gonna like that, man.
He says it's a good game, and Bison, if you listen to this, we're not saying that we don't think the game is bad. It's not bad. It's just it does feel kind of weak.
The localized name is kind of bad, though.
Yeah, it's not that good.
I guess for myself, as I mentioned earlier, I'm probably the least amount I've beaten. However, I've played a lot of the other 2D Tales games, so it's kind of weird. But anyway, I've beaten Legendia. I've beaten Xillia 1 and 2. I've played Abyss halfway, didn't finish it. Symphonia halfway, didn't finish it. Symphonia 2, this might surprise Sword, but I'm actually towards the end of the game, so I'm like 97%. So there's that. Zestiria, let's just keep going. And Berseria, I haven't played it yet. I want to play it, but I'm sure I'm probably missing out on probably one of the better games. And Vesperia, I didn't finish it, but there's reasons for those games. When we ever get to them, I'll explain the reason why I haven't finished those games.
Okay, I guess for the first Tales game we're talk about what's perhaps the Final Fantasy VII of the Tales games, which is Tales of Symphonia. I say this because in terms of its popularity among the Tales fans, in that it's pretty much almost a good amount of the fan base's first Tales game. Just like how Final Fantasy VII was the starting point for a bunch of people just starting out JRPGs or just in the Final Fantasy series in general.
And ironically, both of the first 3D Tales games in their respective series too, which is interesting.
Yeah. So, Tales of Symphonia. What can we say? Tales of Symphonia is basically the game that laid the foundations for the 3D Tales games. Strange enough, it's not the game that introduced free running. That was Tales of the Abyss. But there was still a three-dimensional plane in Tales of Symphonia in terms of the combat system. It's just that you couldn't really access that three-dimensional plane. Your AI could though. And
Yeah, right. How does that work? They're breaking the rules.
like, I don't think it was much of a problem, at least in terms of controlling Lloyd, just because he had a lot of arts that allowed him to like a lot of maneuverability in terms of you got a bunch of arts that get him propelling over the enemy, so you getting stuck on one side, getting cornered, wasn't much of a problem when you were playing as Lloyd. And that was
He has
okay.
quite a bit of maneuverability.
Yeah.
Bypass that limit.
But besides that little nitpick, I would say the combat system in Tales of Symphonia was really fun. It was fast paced. There was a lot of neat little combos you can do. Union attack was pretty neat, and the Union engage, just basically like a gauge where you do attacks with each character, and if you do specific arts together, you can do like a cross Union attack, like a double Union attack. Like if you do Kratos' and Lloyd's Sonic Thrust, I think it activates a unique combo for them in the Union gauge. I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, something like that. I haven't played it in quite a while, but it's like certain combinations will activate like bonus abilities, like arts.
And I think that was really neat in terms of just like experimenting with different characters' arts and seeing which one would combo with each other. And I think Tales of Symphonia has a pretty interesting system in terms of gauging which arts you can actually learn in terms of the T and S system. I think that was it, right?
Yeah, they had like the technical and strike system. I don't really remember what dictated how, like what direction the gauge went.
Yeah, but then like you had a unique set of arts for each side of the system, which I thought was neat and gave some more replayability in Symphonia.
It was an interesting system.
Yeah. And Symphonia overall, at least for the first quarter of the game, had this really interesting open-endedness to it in terms of how you can, like, once you get past the fire temple, you could pretty much go to any temple you wanted, really, if you could like get past the higher enemy level. But it wasn't really gated in terms of like plot progression. You weren't really gated by which temple you could go in the Silveron arc of the game.
Yeah, it was more like pseudo non-linear, kind of.
Yeah,
something like that.
I thought that was neat.
This is kind of important that we should bring up then. As I'm not really the expert in this game, I have some issues with Symphonia, which is the reason why I've never finished it. My only couple of complaints that I have is I think the beginning of the story is kind of slow. I don't find the characters not all that interesting. And it could just be the way the game is told in the storyline. It's an older game. It's not a newer game. So you can't really fault the game for being the way it is. But I'm not a fan of the style of the game. The cell shaded it looked kind of short. It's just not, to me, I don't particularly care for it. But so I don't think the game is bad. It's not for me. But I will say this, if anybody picks up a version of Symphonia, it'll come down to two different situations. The GameCube version runs at a solid 60 frames per second. It probably would be considered, arguably, if you care about frames, being that the game's kind of actiony, it's not really a turn-based game, you know what I mean? I would probably say go with that version if you care about the native version with the best frame rate. But if you care about the content, then I would go with the PS3 version because it's based off the PS2 version of Symphonia. And that one, unfortunately, runs at 30 frames per second. So it may, for anyone who's played the GameCube version, it may be kind of jarred and probably not like the 30 frames per second version of Symphonia. but that one does have some differences to it. So if you're looking to pick up one that is more definitive version, you could say it's a PS2 version, but in terms of like frame rate, the GameCube version is the best one to get. So it really it kind of comes down to whatever you prefer. But I don't particularly think the game is bad though. It's just I don't think the game's aged well personally. It's just not. I don't know. I didn't think the story's slow, and that's part of my. That's kind of a running thing with me, with some of these Tales games. Yeah, that's kind of where I stand. If I don't really say much else about the game, that's kind of where I stand with it.
So what do you guys think of the dungeon design in this game then? Symphonia.
Oh my god.
Remember the shadow? The shadow connecting the shadow the shadow.
It's like a bad Pikmin game.
Oh, you talking about how the enemies walk around looking like shadows?
No. In the Shadow Temple, there's this puzzle where you had to collect every shadow bits in order to progress through the dungeon.
Oh, that.
But then sometimes the shadows will get lost if you don't do it right, and then you have to go back, and that was really annoying.
Yeah, I didn't particularly like that at all.
And then there was the the elves forest where you had to do something with boars and birds and fruit, I think.
Yeah, you had to like. There was some like really arbitrary like sequence of events you had to do to like lure like an animal to eat. So I don't remember. It was like really weird and annoying.
Yes, to me it seemed like.
And let's not forget. Let's not forget. Symphonia really like its block puzzles.
Oh, don't even remind me. I feel like the dungeons drag because of the redundant like puzzles. Like every dungeon that you go to, and I do mean like almost every dungeon is like a really fucking elaborate puzzle, and it gets kind of.
I'll probably say that Tales of Symphonia probably has the most memorable dungeon design of the series for me, just because each like temple or dungeon have its own gimmick to them that, for better or worse, sticks to your mind.
Right, yeah, it could be good or it could be bad depending on who you ask.
Like in the other Tales games, it's whatever. But in Symphonia, it's memorable, I think. Yeah, Force?
Is it just me, or does it seem like every Tales game has some thing that annoys you? Like, for instance, not to get off topic from this game, but like the temple in Zestiria.
Are you talking about the water temple?
Yeah, or like this is the 2D Tales game, but there is a dungeon where you go in the forest in Eternia, and it's a maze, and it will drive you up the wall. You know, it seems like every Tales game has one thing that like, well, I don't remember Zilla 2 having that problem.
They don't, but they have really linear dungeons.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably it's like a trait of a Tales game. It's got to have one dungeon or temple or something that just infuriates you in some way.
I think certain Tales games have their moments of frustration depending on which one.
But yeah, I still say that Symphonia has the most memorable dungeons of the series. Even if,
they're the most like unique and interesting.
Yeah. Hey, we had a cooking system, remember?
Yeah. I mean,
the Team Symphonia overall has a pretty interesting cooking system in terms of teaching you how to cook, in terms of finding the Wonder Chef.
Yeah, which were always like fun little things to find, especially when the disguises are really kooky.
I mean, you can totally tell what a Wonder Chef is.
Yeah, I think Vesperia is the most obvious.
But it's always neat to find them and then learning a new recipe.
I mean, I never really took advantage of it that much, but it's cool that it's there and it can be helpful.
And the cooking system is pretty helpful in the Team Symphonia games, just so you can get a more reliable way to restore TP.
Yeah, because orange gels aren't always easy to come by or cheap.
Yeah.
I thought the EX skill system was pretty good. Not like a super in-depth like customization system, but it had some add some depth with the gems.
The music in Symphonia was pretty good, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Tales soundtracks are never terribly memorable, but I think Symphonia has some pretty good standouts. I think my favorite is the Beat the Angel track, and Fighting the Spirit was really good too.
Mm-hmm. But isn't that a remix from Fantasia?
Yeah, it is, but I really like the remix. But if we're talking original soundtrack, it's Beat the Angel for me.
I find Idrisov's themes pretty interesting.
Yeah, there's definitely some standout stuff.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Now let's talk about the story. Now the story can be split into 3 parts, I think. The Silveron arc, Tetha'ala arc, and then the conclusion part, where the part after the tree, shall we say?
Mm-hmm. It's basically like each arc is like its own Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 of the story. Like the Silveron arc is obviously the build up. Like it's got its moment.
I think it does a good job of introducing the world.
I just think it drags a little too much.
I think it has some really good moments in there.
Yeah, like there's parts where it like really like grabs you, where I'm like, oh, what was that about? Like, oh, there's like some really good foreshadowing here and there.
I think
like,
the Mabel arc is pretty...
Oh, the marble part, right?
The
At
marble,
the beginning
yeah.
with the old... Yeah, that was good.
And then I think the part where you go back to the mayor.
You find out that his wife was a monster.
No, his daughter. I think that was his daughter.
Well, yeah, no, his daughter was like one of those... Yeah, she was like in disguise, and then his wife turned into one of those Crucius monsters or whatever. Like with the same way that Marble turned into.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a pretty powerful
and then
little
there's
story
the
beat
tie
there.
arc with, I can't remember the guy's name. Start with Kim. Kavar?
I think that was his name.
Yeah, the Kavar part, and then you see Kratos just doing his...
Just slaughter him.
Yeah. Yeah, it has some really good parts in the first Silveron arc, but then...
Yeah, those are the parts that'll stick with you, but otherwise it's like, I feel like there's a lot of running around and just...
You basically do go to the Symphonia 2 temples and stuff. The first one.
Yeah. But then once you get to the Tower of Salvation, that's when like it drops a lot of bombshells on you, and that's when it gets so much better.
Mm-hmm.
Like the entirety of Act 2 in Tetha'ala it's quite a ride, honestly.
Yeah.
That's when they start like dropping all the twists on you, and the best moments happen in Tetha'ala. That's where the meat of the story is, I think. Now, granted, I haven't played it in quite a while, so I don't remember like really everything that happens in it, but I remember enjoying it like really quite a bit. And then it has a pretty satisfying ending too.
Is there anything else to talk about the story?
I don't think we talked about the characters.
Oh yeah, I think overall, Tales of Symphonia characters are fine. Lloyd's a lovable idiot. Colette's pretty cool and nice, and I do like her arc. Airhead, but I do like her arc of how the more temples she prays to, the less human she becomes, and how she loses
like one human sense.
Yeah. I thought that was really neat.
And
then you see how she was a sweetheart at the start of the Silver arc, and then when she fully becomes an angel, and she just becomes this dead doll, and then you see just being this
like
emotionless doll, and then she kicks the dog, even though she used to love dogs.
I was like, oh, Colette, I thought we were friends.
There's this unique ability each character has on the overworld map, and Colette was naming dogs. And then she just kicks the dog in one of the cutscenes when you go to one of the main capitals in Tetha'ala.
It's like kind of funny, but also like really sad.
Yeah. Genus, he's okay. I never really
I didn't mind him.
Smart
He's
Alec
just Lloyd's
genius.
friend.
Yeah, Lloyd's friend. Kind of a smart Alec. One of his most memorable lines is, "Ha ha, you got rejected."
I think Lloyd and Genus have some good dynamics with each other like that.
Yeah. And Genus is there basically to replicate the theme of
Like discrimination.
Yeah, discrimination and stuff. Of how half elves are discriminated against. Him and Rain are pretty much in there for that theme, I think.
Yeah.
But Rain's
I like
really Rain's cool. She's intellectual and she's a teacher, but it's really funny how she can't cook. Like at
she
all.
almost kills the other characters sometimes with her horrible cooking.
Yeah.
Hell, even her cooking stat is terrible.
Yeah. And then like there's this part in the game where you have to cook for the gnomes in the Earth Temple in Tetha'ala, and then you can choose Rain to cook.
Mm-hmm.
But since the gnome haven't tasted curry before, it doesn't know if Rain's cooking is bad or not, and that's really pretty funny. And let's see, Bratos is a really interesting character, I think.
He's probably like one of the best characters in Symphonia.
Yeah.
His backstory and his relationship with certain characters in the party is pretty good.
Yeah. And his role in the story with you not really knowing whose sides he's on, really.
Mm-hmm. Even when like his true affiliations come out, you're still really not sure if he's on that side too. So you really never really know who he's fighting for.
Yeah. Sheena is pretty badass, I think.
I like she. Yeah, she's probably she's like one of the top contenders. Her and Kratos, I think, are the top characters in Symphonia.
Especially her arc with Volt and the side mission.
And then how her
and her side mission with the I forgot what that ninja guy's name is, but there's like a side story where she has to fight this guy who wants revenge on how a bunch of people from her village died protecting her when she was trying to make a pact with Volt, but she wasn't ready since they were a kid. Rigo
Rigo's pretty badass.
Yeah, badass and tragic in terms of how he was incarcerated and why he will never ever use his hands, just based on the tragedy behind it. I thought that was really neat.
Yeah, he had an extra layer to himself that some of the other characters didn't have.
Hey, if he can use it, he'll be able to use Kamehameha's, man. Oh
it's true.
Let's see.
And there's Persea.
Persea.
I didn't think much of her.
Yeah.
I mean, her backstory, like her ties to Regal, were kind of cool.
Yeah.
And her sister.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, she kind of comes off as like a Rei Ayanami clone, like the emotionless doll trope.
Yeah, she's basically a kudere. But then it is interesting in terms of you finding out her backstory, and how tragic it is, and how it ties to Regal.
Mm-hmm. And I guess I think the last one is Zelos.
He's rather interesting in terms of being a chosen of a world that's not declining.
Mm-hmm.
And then as a result, he acts just as this flamboyant character, who's like pretty carefree, but then he does have his own troubles to him, in terms of him being worried about his sister, about being the chosen at times, and yeah.
Yeah, so he has some good layers to him. Mm-hmm. Like it's honestly definitely not my favorite Tales cast for sure, but I like them for the most part. But I don't think they're quite as like layered as some of the other later Tales games that come out. But overall, I like Symphonia. It's one of my more.
Symphonia I like. I would probably say it's overrated, at least to me, in terms of like how some people say it's the only good game.
Yeah, it's the only one worth bothering with.
But overall, as a game itself, it's a really fun game, and I like how it laid the foundations for the future 3D Tales games.
It's a game I definitely respect quite a bit.
Yeah. And it has its own type of charm as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, like the first quarter of the structure of the first quarter of the game is really interesting, just because of how open-ended it is, and it does have the most memorable dungeon design as well, and the upgrading system, the customization system is also pretty interesting as well. Its own unique things though, even though it is the first game in the series, the 3D game. Was
Symphonia the first one to introduce skits? I'm not sure.
No, it wasn't.
Ah, okay. But the skits are like it's a great staple. I think Symphonia does a great job of like conveying like that tradition.
And
I think it's it for Symphonia.
Yeah, I guess we should talk about Symphonia too.
Yeah, might as well jump right into that one since they're directly connected.
So now, Tales of Symphonia 2. People don't really like this game, man.
And you know
I'd
what
say
I gotta
this
say
is
about
the
that?
most panned Tales game aside from Zestiria.
You know what I got to say about that?
What?
It is a Pokemon of Tales games.
That description is not entirely wrong.
Mhm.
Because there is like a Pokemon-esque collecting system. It's like, just like how Persona kind of have like a Pokemon collecting system.
And I'm not against that inherently. I do think that there's like kind of sense of satisfaction collecting monsters as you go, but I think the act of actually collecting them is really frustrating.
Yeah, just because it's based on elemental that you can conjure, and sometimes you can capture them, sometimes you can't. I don't know.
And it's not always clear what monster you're gonna potentially get at the end of a battle either.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times they just
Like-
run away from you. So it's like what the
Yeah. I think the raising part is pretty cool, especially when you evolve them. But then it's just the catchy part that's a bit frustrating.
But it's like, yeah, when you like level them up and evolve them, you can make some really awesome monsters that are super strong. That end up being stronger than a lot of the human characters. Like the Fenrir monster, like holy crap.
I'll ask you this then, okay? Was the Pokemon S mechanics worth it?
If they fleshed it out more, if they like, if they improved the like mostly the way you collect them, it probably could have. But then again, I feel like a downside to them compared to the human characters is that they can't use items. So it's like you only rely on Emil and Marta to use items, which is I think is a problem. So otherwise, like once I got to the final dungeon of the game, I didn't use my monsters.
Was it worth having monster mechanics over having nerf main characters? Symphonia characters are so nerf, man.
Yeah, no, they suck.
Yep.
Like Lloyd is so nerfed compared to the first one.
He's so freaking slow. Almost every Symphonia character that returns in this game feels pretty nerfed compared to the Symphonia 1 counterparts. I guess.
I think said though, I do like if we look at the like, well, first of all, I know Abyss came first, but I do like free run. They introduced free run, which I think was an improvement over Symphonia 1.
Having free run, having control of movement in 3-dimensional is really cool. And Emil is still a lot of fun to play, I think, as a main character.
I think he has a really unique fighting style compared to the other Tales characters. Like he really heavily relies on aerial combos, which I think is pretty interesting.
Marta's pretty okay. He's pretty.
Yeah, I don't mind playing as her.
But yeah, that's basically just 2 main characters you play as throughout the game.
And then the Symphonia cast one kind of just they come and go.
They come and go until the final dungeon where they all join. But you pretty much be playing only as Emil and Marta, which can be a problem for some people if you want to experiment. Though, I think most people only play the main characters on most Tales games anyway. So
it probably wouldn't be a problem. Like I admit I'm one of those. I usually stick to the main characters because I usually just like their fighting styles a lot. But like so there are some Tales games where I'll switch around and experiment a little bit.
Like I started experimenting with characters from, let's see, Zelia and onward. No, not Zelia onwards, Graces and onwards. It's because they made mages feel pretty fun to play. Why in the Symphonia, Abyss, and maybe Vesperia, the playing with mages was pretty boring, man. You just stand there and cast arts. There's really nothing to it. Unlike
they're just sitting in the back row, just casting magic.
Unlike in the other games where they give incentive to doing they gave like some physical arts to the mages, and there's good incentive to using them in terms of how using more arts will reduce the cast time. So you have to experiment on which arts you think is pretty ideal to use first, and then use your big casting arts so it could be cast faster. I think that's a really interesting mechanic introduced later on in the Tales series, but that doesn't really get introduced until like Graces F. at least in terms of the
Mhm.
Western games.
But I was always like satisfied playing as Emil. I thought his fighting style was a lot of fun compared to the other Tails characters. No, he wasn't like my favorite Tails character to play as, but he was definitely really interesting to play as. What'd you guys think about like how they didn't have an overworld map? I didn't
That
mind it
didn't really
personally.
bother me too much. I mean, I do kind of like the idea of you walking around, like seeing the three-dimensional environment as you're going to the next place. Because Grace's F does the same thing. But I mean, I know
I
some
mean, wait,
people
wait,
like
wait, no,
the
no, wait,
map,
wait,
but
no, wait. Rest of stuff still had you go from field to field, unlike in Symphonia 2, where it's basically point and click
It's
where you
just a
want to
menu.
go. Yeah.
Mhm. Which personally, like that personally didn't bother me. I thought it kind of kept the game moving at a good pace.
I
I'm
like.
kind of indifferent to overworld maps in general. Like I think they can be good or bad depending on how they're handled. So like when I bought the game and saw that it was just a point and click, I was like kind of like whatever.
To me, if it was its own brand new game, I probably would mind it, just because you wouldn't really feel like you're going through exploring the world. Like I didn't mind it so much in Symphonia 2, just because I have already explored this world in Symphonia 1. But if it was
Yeah,
its
so like it might
own,
kind of feel redundant almost.
yeah. So well, if it was its own thing, I would be disappointed. But since it's a sequel, I didn't really
I
mind it that
totally,
much.
I totally forgot that this game had a point and click map.
Yep.
Yeah, and the thing is, I hadn't played the game in so long. Since I really didn't say much when they were talking, I'm going to chime in like I did before. In my kind of, because I'm kind of indifferent with these games. Now there are some when we get to them that I'm in agreement with the games that we've played. It's just that there's some I'm not in agreement with. Which in this case we can agree with this game's not that great. But I really don't like this game either. Uh I just
Yeah,
think that
I'm the most positive out of all, and I'll admit. Like I feel like not to cut you off, but I feel like I'm the more positive one. Force is more, or I'm sorry, yeah, Peter's like more mixed, and then Force is more like a little more negative. So it's kind of interesting.
yeah, this game is weak amongst the Tales games. But primarily these are the things I think they could have improved on is having a nice world that's interconnected would have been better than having a point and click map. And this could have been due to the Nintendo Wii's limitation.
I mean, the
The
original
other,
Graces was on the Wii and it had this world. This like
yeah, but Graces came out much later.
yeah.
Although you do know that the Graces game on the Wii is very buggy
Yeah.
to a point that they even recalled the game.
Mhm.
So, but
I mean, we can't
now
say it's that the Wii is
at the moment in time,
incapable. We can't say the Wii is incapable of having.
Like Xenoblade Chronicles, for
Yeah.
example.
no. If we're talking about strictly how this game was made,
Mhm.
it felt rushed. It didn't feel like they really tried hard enough to make it feel top notch like Symphonia 1 did. Because it had a completely different style. It wasn't cell shaded. It had this it was 3D, but it wasn't like great. Um I don't think the music was particularly memorable in this game. I think it was actually not as memorable as the Symphonia 1. I think the music in the first game was better. Um, I do like the monster collecting mechanic of the game. It is kind of random at times, but it is kind of fun if you really just kind of like take it for what it's worth. It's not like horrible or anything. It's just not like Tenebrae, for instance. He's an interesting character. But I mean, aside from that, like
I mean, he's the best character in the game, man.
it's kind
Hmm.
of sad to say that, but yeah, he is. Um, I don't particularly think I don't think the battle system's amazing or anything.
It's
And then hmm?
like the battle system. I think is decent if you can like compare it to other action combat systems. But if you compare it to like a Tails combat system, it's pretty disappointing.
It's
But
just standard Tails combat.
even with all that said, my biggest issue was how they portrayed the original cast of Symphonia. It just they felt weak and not important when they had such an importance in the first game, and it's like And of course, Lloyd, the way he acted, like I don't know, it's just bizarre to me. It just seems like night and day with the characters. Like the way they treated him in this game, it's weird. But it's to me, it's not a great game. I would never go back to play it again. There's no difference between the Wii and the PS3 version in this regard, so it doesn't matter which version you buy. Well, I'm sorry, it only
Yeah.
comes with a collection, so you can only get the collection with the second game with the first one on PS3, but it
And
doesn't matter.
You don't have to worry about the Wii motion.
Oh well, yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. So if you don't care about Wii motion controls, go with the PS3 version. But that's all I got to say about Symphonia 2. I didn't like the game particularly.
Story and characters.
I actually
I
thought
do
the story
not.
was
I do
pretty
not.
good.
I do not remember the story in Symphonia 2.
Yeah, it's been a long. Like I when I say I like it, I'm going off 8 years of memory right now. But if I'm going off then, I actually remember liking. I remember being interested in it, and there are some parts that I do genuinely remember, and I remember there are some late game twists that I thought pretty much threw me for a loop. Especially, I think the thing that threw me for a loop the most was the Ratatosk reveal at the end of the game. I don't know if you guys remember that. I thought that was
yeah,
pretty.
yeah,
pretty
I
good
remember
twist.
that.
Yeah, that was a good twist to me.
Like I remember the ending parts of the game, and the beginning parts of the game. I can't remember what happens in between.
Yeah, like I admit my memory is like really, really fuzzy, so I can't even really comment on all the specific story beats because it's been almost a decade since I've touched it.
Mhm.
I think I will say this though. I feel like people harp on Emil too much. I think he has some really good character development throughout the course of the game. Like if he persisted his that the way that he's portrayed in the beginning throughout the entire game, then I would get it. But like when I was playing the prologue, I felt like really sorry for him because he's being burdened by things that aren't his fault, and he's being just horribly mistreated by his guardians and all the townsfolk. So I personally sympathized. I didn't like think any less of him. I was like, oh shit, that sucks. But throughout the course of the game, he starts to like grow a backbone, especially like the dichotomy with him and his Ratatosk personality. I thought that was really interesting. Especially like
it's pretty interesting when you find out what he tries to do at the end. In terms of like mimicking Ratatosk.
Yeah, that was a really good ending. Especially that leads to a bad ending if you lose that battle on purpose. And like I think what's cool is not to like divulge too much into it for spoiler's sake, I guess, but like as you go on, there are parts where the Ratatosk personality of himself actually starts to become like self-aware, and then it'll like forcefully overtake to the point where when he turns back, Emil doesn't even remember what happened. So it's like there's like this literal inner battle between the two of them, and then he like overcomes it at the end of the game, showing that he doesn't need Ratatosk to be like a strong, capable person. So I thought that was good.
Emil is also voiced by Johnny Young Bosch.
Yeah, I think he did a great job.
So it's like Ichigo.
Yeah.
But joking aside, like in terms of Emil, I never minded him. I thought he was fine. It made perfect sense why he was the way he is in the beginning of the game, just because he's in this village that was basically funded by Lloyd and rebuilt by Lloyd's money. And so it would make sense why the townspeople wouldn't really like this random kid shit-talking the hero that basically rebuilt their town. But then I also understand from Emil's point, just because his parents was killed by what looks like Lloyd at the start.
Mm-hmm.
And then
so it's like, of course he's gonna have a sour opinion of Lloyd.
Yeah. And it's perfectly understandable why he would be very meek and apologetic at setting like where everybody is just trashing on him or having this opinion on their great hero.
Yeah, because he's like an outcast because like one of the reasons why is specifically because he keeps shit talking Lloyd like why he's not a hero, he's a fucking murderer.
Yeah.
And he set fire to his whole like hometown.
Mm-hmm. To Paul Costa.
Or so we think. Yeah, Paul Costa. Yeah.
Paul Costa can never take a break, man.
No, yeah, they're always getting fucked. They really are. When you think
it gets destroyed in the first game by the tree, and then it gets destroyed by the. Which side get destroyed again? Silveron? No.
Yes, Silveron is where
The
they are.
Silveron Liberation Front?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or something like that. I think they're called the Vanguard or something.
Yeah, the Vanguard.
Yeah.
Palmacosta can never take a break.
I feel like people should just call it quits and not live there anymore.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I don't remember too much of the actual storyline, aside from certain parts. But I remember liking it, and I do think that Emil had some good character development.
Tenebray's still the best character, though.
Oh yeah, no, he's a boss.
He's like Tenebray to me is like the best mascot character, I think.
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah, he just has. He's basically almost like Jade, almost.
I was just about to say he's the Jade of this game.
Yeah, except he's a lot less mean, I guess. He's just a lot more sarcastic.
Because Jade is like, he likes to tease too. He likes to ball bust, whereas Tenebray just has like this dry sense of humor, and he's always sarcastic, which I love.
He also make dad puns, so yeah.
Automatically, he's automatically the best.
Yeah. Is there anything else to talk about Symphonia too? Oh wait, what do you think of Marta?
I thought she was okay.
Yeah, me too.
I didn't mind her. I think the relationship was kind of interesting because normally I'm not into that like love at first sight kind of shit. But I think
it's really interesting how Marta is the one who's really pushing the relationship.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like reverse of what you would think.
Yeah.
But I think the cool part, not cool, but like the interesting part is how she doesn't really love him per se, but she just loves the fact that he saved her from who was coming after her. Was it Lloyd? I think.
Yeah, Lloyd. Yeah, Lloyd.
Lloyd was coming after. Lloyd was coming after her, and then Emil saved her, and then she's just like infatuated with him at that point. Even though it's more like she loves that he saved her, not that really she loves him per se. So I think that was kind of interesting, and that Emil even like declines her advances and tells her that she's just being delusional. He doesn't reciprocate right away. So that was interesting.
Okay, I guess that's all for Symphonia too, right?
That I can think of anyway.
Okay. Let's talk about Forrest's favorite Tales game, okay?
Oh shit, here we go again.
Legendia.
Didn't we go out of order here?
Did we?
Well, I mean, technically with Symphonia 2, because that can't come out until after.
Yeah, but
Abyss.
then.
But like chronologically, you know, I think it makes more sense to talk about it right after Symphonia.
Yeah.
I thought Symphonia was the Final Fantasy VII. I'm sorry. I thought Legendia was the Final Fantasy VII.
No, Legendia is more like the Final Fantasy VIII.
What?
No. Well, no. In terms of fan divide, it's so divisive, just like Final Fantasy VIII is.
At least Legendia doesn't have the contrived scene
orphanage plot twist.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, that one.
Well, it does have one thing in common.
What?
You're on a ship.
What can we say about Tales of Legendia?
Like I said, one
sucks.
thing. Look it up.
I would say it sucked, but I would say.
Come on now, I'll let you guys talk positive before I say anything bad. Yeah. So can I get my turn first?
Yeah, no, you go ahead. This is your baby here, so we'll let you take the floor.
All right, that's nice of you. I appreciate it. Wait, what? All right. So Legendia is the first game in the series I played, and I absolutely loved it. Now, let's be frank. If it had been shoe on the other foot, and I played another Tales game before Legendia, it could be different. The reason I hold Legendia in a certain place comparative to some of the other Tales games is because not only was it the first game in the series I played, but when I played it at the time, I wasn't really into a lot of JRPGs like I am now. So just the exposure to more JRPGs now probably would have swayed my opinion of the game differently. But I love the simplistic style of the graphics of the game. It reminded me of 7, believe it or not. I love the vocal music in Legendia. Every piece of music in this game really just pushes the storyline along. I think the music captures the essence of the game. Probably one of the best soundtracks of any Tales game, in my opinion.
Hey, guess who composed the soundtrack in this game? It wasn't Motoi Sakuraba. It was Go Shida.
Go Sheena, yeah.
More like Goat Sheena.
But yeah, continue on.
But the characters. Now, you could say hearing Shirley over and over again could be annoying because you're going to hear it a lot. Matter of fact, it's a running joke at this point that you will hear. Shirley, Sino, Shirley, Sino. You're going to hear that a lot, but if you can get past that, the characters are really interesting. They're on a floating landscape, kind of, sort of weird.
They're on a ship.
Technically on a ship, but their continent is floating on a ship, and it's kind of interesting how, I don't know if they ever go into explanation about it. I don't think they do. I haven't played in a long time, so I can't remember. But nevertheless, it's really the only thing I can say, other than the fact that I think the game, I really love the game. I just like the arc, the actual ending of the game has this really nice arc that you can play. And the game didn't feel long. It's probably not a very long Tales game, to be quite honest with you. It's probably one of the shorter ones. But this is one of the first games that the game is 3D, but it doesn't play in a 3D plane like the newer Tales games do. This one plays more like a 2.5D game. It's actually kind of side-scroll 3-dimensional. It literally is a 2-dimensional game, just like the 2D games that were.
Hey, you know who made this game?
The Soul Calibur team, right?
Yeah, not the Tails team. The Soul Calibur team.
That's the thing. Soul Calibur team made this game. It's so weird to say that. I don't know how that makes any sense.
That's because they were developing Tales of the Abyss simultaneously with Legendia, so I guess that's why they gave Legendia to another team so that the Tales can develop Abyss. I think that's what it was.
They were so wanting to get this game out that they had a fighting team to make it.
Yeah, basically.
So now here's a question I gotta ask Sword. Since Sword is actually the one that doesn't like this game, let's hear your negative side of my favorite.
No.
Well, I mean, okay, like I don't hate it or anything. I just think it's really forgettable and bland. Like I admit that I haven't played, like, it's kind of the same deal with like Symphonia 2, that I haven't played it in like almost a decade now, so my memories of certain things are pretty vague. The parts that I do like the music, as I already said, is phenomenal. It's one of my favorite RPG soundtracks, honestly. Like there's not even a single dull track. It's like sublime. And as for the characters, I like the main cast, the playable cast. The supporting cast is either like bland, like the villains, or are annoying, like the fucking otters or whatever they are. But like as far as the main cast, I like their interactions. I like the banter, and the chemistry is really well done. I also like the fact that the game has voice skits. Like in most of the other Western Tales games, up until whatever it was, like Symphonia didn't have voice skits. It had voice skits in Japan.
Like after this game, I think the Tales games were voiced.
Well, Abyss had silent skits. Yeah. Also,
I'm not sure if this game I'm not sure if Abyss came after or before this game. That's why.
No, Abyss came, I'm pretty sure Abyss came after this. I'm like just relatively certain. But anyway, I wish there were more skits. They're pretty few and far between in Legendia, but the ones that are there are really good and they're amusing. So I like the cast and the banter, even if they're not like terribly deep characters. But I think the problems for me come with like, again, my memory is fuzzy, so I'm going off memory here.
I'd probably say the skits is interesting in that most of the skits are just mostly about certain situations you run into, rather than expanding on the characters. Which is why I think Tales of Legendia is one of the weaker as one of the weaker skits, just because it's more about commenting on the various situations you're gonna run into. Like if you run away too much, if you eat too much gels, or
Yeah, like they don't they're not
or
like
if you collect
covering
this certain weapons.
yeah, like they don't like talk about the most recent story event for the most part.
I
For
mean, it is
example,
interesting how they comment on it and how their personality goes through on commenting on these various items, situations you get yourself into. But I do
Mhm.
think it's kind of weaker than other Tales games where they do comment on the story and how it's more based on character, the chemistry and dynamics
Mhm.
rather
But
than
like during
in
cutscenes
Legend.
though, the dynamic is good. But like yeah,
Yeah,
the lack of skits, not lack of, but like compared
like
to the other Tales games, it's
like
kind of disappointing.
yeah,
But like as far as like I think the storyline has I like the setting and I like the
Mhm.
premise. Like the idea that you're on just this, I mean, the world might feel kind of smaller in scope, but I like the concept of being on a giant floating ship with like organic life on it. Like that's pretty interesting. Um, but I think it gets kind of repetitive because like it really is just a giant fetch quest. Like how many times does one girl get kidnapped? Like Shirley gets kidnapped more times than Princess Peach does on a Tuesday. Like you rescue her, like that's like that's it almost feels kind of contrived. Like oh this is how the writers want us to get to the next dungeon is oh Shirley got kidnapped. We save her. Oh, how do we get the player to the next dungeon? We got to have Shirley get kidnapped.
I
So it
mean
gets kind of like
the
redundant.
Right,
first.
here's this question. Here's this question, right? So your favorite thing about this game, which is your worst thing about this game, is Shirley and Senna screaming at each other.
I didn't mind Sentinel as a character, but yeah, Shirley sucks. She's the word. Shirley to me is the worst Tails character by a mile. Period. The by far bar none. She sucks.
I have to be honest, Shirley. That's such a generic name for. I don't know.
And
I
her
don't know
voice
why.
is annoying as fuck.
Yeah, that's pretty.
But like, I mean, again, I just don't remember much of the plot, but I remember just being like really kind of bored by it because it's so like redundant and even kind of predictable at times. So the overarching story didn't do much for me. I think the idea of having character quests in the second half is actually pretty cool. I didn't really do much of it because I was kind of bored with the game at that point. But I like having a character focused like section.
I will say this, not to cut you off, but I do have a question to ask you. Do you think the music is partly the reason why you were able to finish the game?
So yeah, no, I think for me, if a game is like terrible, but I like the music, I'll just listen to the music itself on its own. But Legendia is not like a terrible game. It's just subpar for me. Um, but like so yeah, for me the story is was kind of just whatever. Like it was there, it was fine, I guess, but it didn't really do much. I think the biggest issues lie in the gameplay. Like for example, I think that the dungeons are just really weak. I think these are some of the worst dungeons in the series because they all just boil down to palette swaps and just long twisting turning mazes with not a lot of variety, and then they try to shoehorn in these like puzzle rooms and they're super easy and just really bland and boring and there's nothing to them. It's just really
I
really
do
boring
find it
box puzzles.
I do find it really funny how they split the puzzles into its own dimension
Yeah, exactly.
rather than integrating them into the dungeon design.
It's like they didn't know how to do that, so they just made them their own little separate rooms, which is, and you can even skip them, so it feels like pointless to even have them. It's just like what the hell. And for me, the combat system just felt really like, how do I put this? It's kind of hard to explain in words. You just kind of have to like play it to know what I'm talking about. It just doesn't feel smooth. Like it feels like it feels very floaty, and I'm not really feeling like the impact of my attacks sometimes. And sometimes the battles get so chaotic because you're on such a small plane that I really can't even keep up with like all the spell effects that are going on. I can't even tell what I'm hitting sometimes because enemies are like buried beneath each other because it's such a small fighting window. And I admit I like Sentinel's fighting style. I thought the climax attacks were really cool. It was sort of like the unison attacks in Symphonia. So like you had that gauge build up, and then you can just wail on the enemies, and kind of like it's more like Persona's all out attacks, if anything, than anything else, which I thought were a cool addition. It kind of adds a little another nice dynamic to the combat. But otherwise, it's a kind of a I think it feels like a sloppy Symphonia. It just doesn't feel very polished or satisfying.
Wow, so sloppy Symphonia for a game
Yeah,
that came out way before Symphonia.
No, it came out after Symphonia.
Wait, what?
Yeah, no, Symphonia was the first 3D Tales game.
Yeah.
Legendia came out after Symphonia.
Really?
Yeah.
God, these graphics.
Yeah, they're so bad.
No, they're charming though, and like their own kind of.
But like on a technical level, they look bad.
But you gotta admit, can't nobody say Sinnoh better than Shirley.
It's true. He nailed that craft.
She nailed calling Sinnoh's name very annoyingly well.
Oh yeah, and yeah, incest. I mean, it's a classic Japanese trope
Oh, wait,
there, because
Is it really incest?
it's
Is
not
it really?
technically- It's not technically, but it's the next worst thing because they grew up together. They're portrayed as brother
Yeah,
and sister.
but
They can't hand wave. They're actually.
They only said they're brother and sister. Senna was going to marry his sister. Her what's her name again?
There's another girl, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was another girl he was going to marry, wasn't it?
Yeah. Shirley's sister.
Yeah, it was her sister, wasn't
Stella, right, or something like that.
Yeah, Stella.
Yeah, was it Stella?
Yeah.
it? Stella, yeah, it was Stella. But the thing about it is, that kind of, God, I didn't think it's so. Why did you bring that up?
Like,
incest is wincest.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
The storyline until you mention it.
I don't know if I would call it incest because, like, they only known each other for a year or two, like in the village. Not like they grew up together as brother and sister.
And see, this is going off memory, so and maybe I might be totally off.
Well, let's just say, let's just say, like, for the overall conclusion of Symphonia, since this is a game that I'm sorry, did I say Symphonia again? Legendia. Since this is a game I really like, I would just say it's not for everyone. It has not aged well. It doesn't look that great. It has not been ported, has not been remastered, has not had anything done to it. It's only on PS2, didn't come out in Europe. So if you really want to experience this game for what it's worth, for that damn fantastic ass soundtrack, I would say give it a try. The game's not that expensive. You probably pick it up for about $20 in America, maybe more if you're overseas. But it's really not a horrible game. But I will tell you this: when you do fight in battles, because it's a side scroll, it feels like you're fighting. It feels like you're button mashing. I mean, you can do like combos, but the game feels like when you push buttons in battle, it's delayed. It doesn't feel. Feels like when you're doing stuff, it's after the fact. It's button mashy to me. There's no substance to the combat. There's some combos, but you can definitely tell this feels like a fighting team made this game, which is what happened, because it really feels button mashy to me, unless you really get precise and intricate with it. But it's visually an interesting game, but it's not something that will wow in everyone, and it's one that'll be laid to the wayside and probably never get talked about much these days. It's always about that Vesperia and Abyss. Yeah.
For me personally, I would say that Legendia to me is one of the weaker Tales games, and I probably do see why people do call it the black sheep of the series. But there are various parts of Legendia that I really like. I really like the music. The soundtrack by Goshina was really good in this game. And it worked really well for what this game tried to do. The characters I really like. I might have said that Skit was probably the worst of the series, but I do like the character dynamics. They have an actual story. And in the character quest, where the character quest really flesh out each of these characters' backstories and stuff. And the only negative thing I can say about the character quest is that they're not voiced, which is really unfortunate. think Where to Begin is a really nice town to keep coming back to. I think that's it, really. Combat is pretty subpar. The puzzles is pretty subpar. I like the setting a lot as well, in terms of the game taking place on this landmass that's basically a ship that's going through the world, and how it's the centerpiece to all of the world's conflicts, to the point where you don't even go to the mainland, even though they reference it a lot in the story. And I do think it does its discrimination theme pretty well in the second arc of the game.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
About on par with how Symphonia handled it.
No, I do see what you guys said about Legendia. Now, like I said, do you guys agree though? At the end of the day, that I think it's a game that, while it's not great, I think it's one. If you have the ability to play it, it's worth at least checking out, just because it's the black sheep of the Tales games, just strictly off the fact it was not developed in house from a Tales studio side of the project. It really does kind of have this charm to it that no other Tales game has, because it just did not fit the norm of any other Tales game, and it wasn't designed by a Tales team. So it's kind of like a what if scenario if a Tales game were all developed by a fighting studio. This is kind of what would happen.
A 3D fighting studio that's working on a 2D fighting system.
Yeah, he actually summed it up perfectly. Because when you play it, you can tell like the way the combat plays and in its side scroll style, it feels like a fighting game. It just feels like you really have to be like button combination stuff. You just start just doing stuff. You like button mashing. I don't know. It just feels weird.
I mean, I respect Legendia to a large extent. Like, I admire the fact that it's like different from the other Tales games. Like, honestly, if you took away like certain aesthetics and things like that, you'd have and change the name, you'd have something that's unrecognizable as a Tales game, really. And that's not a bad thing. I actually like the fact that it in a way has its own identity, which I admire, and I don't hate it. And I'm not gonna sit here and tell you it's like the worst game in the world or anything. But like, I honestly think it's probably like my least favorite Tales game. It's just, to me, it's not awful. It's just it's subpar.
But yeah, I think that's Tales of Legendia in a nutshell.
Yeah, just a game that, I mean, if you really want to just check it out for the merit of the fact that it's different from the other Tales game, it really is not like the others. It has the idea of a Tales game, but in comparison to everything else, it is definitely the one that stands out like a sore thumb.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Still my favorite though. At the end of the day, I still love Legendia. But like I said, it was the first game I ever played in the series, so it has more of a symbolic symbolism to me, and that doesn't take away from the fact it has problems, because it does. But it always will be my favorite, regardless of its issues.
I guess the next thing to talk about is Tales of the Abyss.
Oh, okay. I'll let you guys go first, and I'll jump in later.
So, to me, Tales of the Abyss is probably my favorite Tales game.
Same for me.
Yeah, I think it has.
It was also my first Tales game, actually.
Oh, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Tales of Symphonia was my first one.
What happened?
I said Tales of the Abyss was actually my first Tales game. There's actually a little story with it. Like, I was actually, the first time I got technically exposed to the Tales series was when the Vesperia demo came out back in 2008, and the game wasn't out yet. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize this was a series of games. So I did some research, and Tales of the Abyss was the one that came before Vesperia. I was like, okay, well, I want to try this series, so I'll get that instead. And then I got that at a GameStop, and that's how I got into it.
Huh. Interesting. I got it for I got the series for Tales of Symphonia, so yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw Tales of the Abyss and Tales of Legendia, like on EB Games. So I just bought both at the same time.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, so
yeah.
you can continue.
I think Tales of the Abyss has the most interesting concept of the setting to me, in terms of how the entire world is ruled by the score, which is this giant stone tablet of prophecies, and how the prophecies are 100% accurate, and so people are constantly relying on score to dictate their everyday lives. And I think that's a really interesting concept of how scary such a concept can be, and how scary it is to know that a bad future is in store, how you try to change it but you apparently can't change it. I think that's a really
There's even times where people try to deviate from the score, but then it turns out the score predicts those deviations, so they're not deviating it from anything.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting concept of the concept of destiny, and how scary it can be at times.
And then how everyone is like complete slaves to the score, and
and how do you keep relying on it?
Mm-hmm. And then you even have that what's his name, Grandmaster Mose, who's like obsessed with the score and will do anything, and he'll start wars.
And he follows the score just because, being the score, that we must obey it, because it's our destiny and stuff.
Mm-hmm. And then like the score predicts like wars and things like that, and he'll go out of his way to make sure wars and people are killed just to uphold the score. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty interesting theme.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, the characters in this game too. Mm-hmm. Luke, I think, is probably one of the more interesting characters in the series, just because of his character development, of how he goes from this brat of a character, just because of how his parents would spoil him and wouldn't even let him go outside, so he's pretty naive to the world, to becoming, later on, seeing the mistakes he's done and how he wants to change, and how even go a bit too far and being very, very, having an inferiority complex, sort of. And then to eventually being able to find his own purpose in life at the end of the game, and how he's able to be confident in himself. I think that's pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah, because the way they handle him in the beginning, he's like so unlikable. I mean, by design. Like, you're not supposed to like him. He's woefully unlikable, and he even says like some very detestable things, to the point where he's like a completely like reprehensible character. And he does actually have some moments of genuine kindness here and there, where you can tell that he actually like he'll say some nice things to certain people at times, and you can hear that it's genuine. But like, these moments don't make up for like some of the awful things that he says about and how he's like even you said that he's entitled, and it's to a point where once he reaches the outside world, like, he expects people to like get down their knees and lick his boots. He just expects everyone to bend to his every whim, and he's always whining, complaining, and I want to go home, and without even any regard for anyone else. But after he makes a horrible mistake, a very colossal mistake, and then all the other characters just walk away from him because they're so tired of his shit.
Except for Guy.
Well, yeah, but even then he initially leaves him. He comes back, but he does walk away at first. Like, that's how bad it is, because Guy is like the most loyal character to Luke, and even he was sick of it after Luke made that like decision.
Yeah.
And even though he's not entirely to blame, it was like a large part his fault too.
I don't know, I still remember that part when Charlie's like, but he's not the real Luke. He's the only Luke I know. See ya.
Yeah, he's like, my friend. That's the real Luke may be here, but my friend is that idiot. And I was like, yeah, it's okay. Man, guy for life.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like, seeing him transform from that brat into like an altruistic, honorable character was like really well done. And it feels genuine. Like, it doesn't feel forced or shoehorned in or anything like that. Like, it actually feels like he wants to make an effort.
Yeah.
And
even though he doesn't take it too far in certain points where he think his life is worth nothing,
Mhm.
But I do like how he further develops into being an altruistic person who's found meaning in his life, even though it was created as even though a person he thought the world of think he's pretty much a useless replica.
Mhm.
And I think the other characters are interesting too. Jade is pretty much the troll of this game, and he's pretty much an established character, so he doesn't change much. But you do see him going through, like, having to fix the mistakes he's done in his past, and then how his mistakes lead to how Vaughn is able to do his plans because of Jade's mistakes. I think that's how it went,
And
right?
it's interesting because if
Yeah.
Jade didn't make that mistake, the game wouldn't even happen. There would be
Yeah.
no story.
And then Guy, and there's this guy hosts chick about Vaughn being a retainer, but then how he's going to go against Vaughn just because he's taking it too far in terms of how Vaughn is trying to save the world by destroying the world, even though it doesn't
Which
make
usually
sense.
is a trope that I can't stand, but like in context, it's actually
Yeah.
his motives are actually logical.
Yeah, just because of
Now,
how the score works, just because how the
Mhm.
score works and how poisonous it can be to society. Society just depends on the score for everything.
Because it's not the cliche, oh, kill everyone to save everyone because
Mhm.
they're suffering or some other dumb shit like that. There
Yeah.
actually is logic behind his actions, which
Yeah.
I think is really good. And I think I like how Abyss's cast is like they're all flawed in some way.
Yeah.
Like they feel like I feel like compared to most of the Tales games, like I think Tales always usually nails having likable characters, but I think
Mhm.
Abyss's cast feels like the most human. I think.
I would say this and Berseria probably feel the most human in terms
Yeah,
of feeling like they're likable characters, but they all have flaws of their own.
which I think makes them more like relatable.
Hmm.
And I like the backstory of Guy with his gynophobia and how he can't go near
Oh
women. Like that's
yeah.
like
Oh yeah. No.
that was really dark,
Hmm.
very and tragic too. I
Okay,
I thought
you
Tyr was a
chime
really
in
good
now?
character too.
Yeah, me too. I wasn't really all that interested in Annis.
I liked her. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't. She definitely wasn't my favorite, but I liked her. Like her whole shtick with being like a gold digger was amusing for a while. But I think that once you learn the reasoning behind it, it's actually pretty sad.
Mhm.
How
Uh,
all
you-
she wanted to, like the only reason she wanted to marry into a rich family was just to get her parents out of poverty, and that's it. Like it wasn't out of selfishness
Yeah. You were gonna say something,
because
Forrest?
her parents fell for a scam.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, uh, obviously, from my personal take on the game is different from theirs. I'm in the minority. I don't particularly like the game, but it's actually for the reasons they mentioned about the main character. He's very selfish. Um, he's kind of sheltered. Because he's sheltered, it allows him to be very disrespectful and not understanding of the world outside of the castle. But at the same time, he grows up to be a very in such a weird way opposite towards the end of the game. But that wasn't enough for me to want to like the game. I think I was so disgusted in the sense that he acted the way he did. But it's understandable. So like I understand the story, the incident that happened that really made it hit him home. You know, it made him grow up. It's sad that it had to happen with that one important moment in the game, but it needed to happen for him to grow up. Um, so you could say that really is one of the charming things about Abyss.
Hmm.
I'm not going to deny for a second that the game has a bad story. It's probably one of the better games I do like, but that still doesn't mean I like the game. I like the game in a sense that I understand what makes the story good. And it does have a good story. And it does have good redeeming quality characters. But at the same time, his attitude towards things and the way he acts really does not sway me well. You know, he's just
Uh,
very stuck up and not a very likable individual. You know, his kind of person you wouldn't want to be around. You're like, I'm just having to force to be around this person just because I know I have to for the sake of
Mhm.
himself and for the sake of other reasons. But um, there is definitely a sense of good writing involved with his character. It wasn't just shoehorned for him to be that way. So, contrary to how I might have previously felt about Abyss, and this may surprise Sword, I'm sure, that I do like the story. I know you're shocked to hear that.
A little bit.
That doesn't mean I like the game though. But in this rare point of what I wanted to say about Abyss is I like the story. That doesn't mean I like the game. I know it's just strange to say it that way, but I do think its story is quite good. I just think its combat's not that great, me personally.
I like the combat in Abyss.
It's not the most. It's clearly dated in.
It's
Like,
dated.
I
That's
thought-
exactly right. Because when I played it, it was much later. It wasn't like when it was on the PS2 and the PS2 was like the relevant console. This was like PS3 later in the PS3. This is actually probably around when Grace's F came out. So
Oh.
it's not like, you know, I played it when it was relevant. So but yeah, the story's good. I'm not gonna sit here and deny that. After sitting more, you know, spending more time with the game. I don't like the main character though. I stand by the fact I don't like him. But I think for his character, for his story, and for everybody else, he has a reason the way he acts. And it's not a fault of his own. It's a fault of him being born in the family that he was born in. So it's not really, you really can't blame him for his situation. It's just when you're born in that
I mean,
family.
can you blame his parents being as protective as they did when they thought he was kidnapped?
No, of course not. I
Yeah.
mean, but understand what I'm saying. It's not,
Mhm.
you can't fault him for being the way he is because he was born in that society. It
Mhm.
wasn't like he had a choice to decide, oh, this is the family I want to be born in, you know?
Mhm.
Like what Sword mentioned earlier with the other character who got married not for selfish reasons, but for family reasons. And that's kind of what I'm saying. Is like for him, it's good he got out of the castle's walls. It made him mature to be more of a respectful individual compared to how he acted in the beginning. So there's a core understanding of there's progression in someone, which is something you don't see very often with a lot of characters. It's good to see that he actually had that sense of responsibility to himself to be more mature and act accordingly and understand the world outside of just what he knew because of the situation he was in. So there is a good story there. Like that alone would give me a reason, even though I don't like the game, that would give me a good enough reason to want to play it. In this case, I would play it just because the story is actually decent. Except for the floating guy, except for the guy who floats in a chair. I don't know.
Oh,
who
dissed?
the great
Dissed.
idea, but that is dumb to me. Like you got a fucking floating chair. But anyway,
That's another thing I think Abyss does well, the villains.
I
terms
think
of
Abyss
how-
has the best villains.
In
this
terms of
series.
how like each main villain in the game is interconnected with the characters in some interesting ways, I think. It makes them really fascinating.
Yeah, they have some like individual personal tie to one of the villains, the God Generals, in some way.
Yeah.
Which I think is really cool, and it adds some like personal conflicts when
Mhm.
it's there's the Luke being the replica of Ash, or Tyr being the student of
The Greta?
Legreta. Yeah, Legreta. Like things like that, like add really interesting dynamics between the villains and
Mhm.
the main cast. And Van, I like Van himself. Like we already mentioned him, but like he actually has motives behind his actions that are actually logical, and he's obviously going about it in a very extreme and misguided way. But you can actually like see like, oh, he has a point. I see where he's coming from, and that's what makes him interesting.
Back to the combat. I wouldn't say I say I like the combat well enough. I would say it can feel dated if you played like Vesperia, Grace's Eve, the Zillia games. It can feel pretty dated. But as for its first 3D rendition of Freerun, I think it's pretty cool. It's pretty overpowered, in terms of what you can get away using free run in the game. But when you're first playing through it, it feels pretty liberating, especially coming from Symphonia and Legendia, where they were only set in the 2D plane where you're playing as the main character, or when you were playing at all. Like even in Symphonia, only the AI characters could go into free run. And I think the comboing system was fine. The skill system was fine, I think. In terms of you learn skills through cores. I think that was it, right?
Yeah, well, like the capacity cores are a cool in concept, but the thing is, they actually dictate what support skills you'll learn, which the game doesn't even tell you. Like I only learned this from Google. I only learned this online.
Okay. Yeah.
And you have to, in order to learn like the additional skills, like the passive skills, you have to have certain stats at certain thresholds, which is like completely dictated by the capacity cores. So in order to get like things like combo plus, you need to have like, oh, your strength needs to be this and your agility needs to be this. But I always thought additional skills were only learned exclusively through leveling up. I didn't realize that you got them from leveling up because you had certain capacity cores equipped that put your stats at certain levels. Like, so like when you put when in that regard, it's cryptic. Like I never knew that. I did not know that they were actually connected to each other. I thought they were totally separate.
Okay.
So I mean, yeah.
The field phonon system is also a pretty interesting mechanic, I think, in terms of there being these fields where if you use an art with them, your art changes, and then which can expand your repertoire. And I especially like how using some arts leave these fields so that you can use them to set up other arts in your combos. I think that's really neat.
Yeah, I just think the other problem is that sometimes it really boils down to you got to be at the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
So it's more of like
I say that's for the starting. I think later on you're able to create fields on your own using certain attacks.
Yeah, which is nice, but it's more like a cool bonus. It's not something I heavily relied on or anything, but when they happen, they're pretty satisfying.
And hey, characters have their own personal over limits in this game.
Which I really liked.
And
because it feels like the over limits in Symphonia were kind of random. Like I think there's like an invisible gauge that we don't see.
Yeah.
That triggers them, but otherwise, like they felt like really random, and I didn't like. You can't rely on them because they just happen kind of whenever they want.
I really do like how you can go to the over limit mode on your volition. And and we got Mystic Arts.
Yeah, which is also a really awesome addition.
Yeah, and I guess there were like some conditions of Mystic Arts in Symphonia, but they were really obscure, I think. And I really like how there's a more concrete way to use Mystic Arts in Abyss and onward, at least for the Western games. I'm not sure about the 2D games, but when you first activate Mystic Art in Tales of the Abyss, it's like the coolest thing ever. It's anime as all heck, but hey, you're playing Tales, so you're probably an anime fan.
And they're always so satisfying to pull off.
Yeah, they're just so cool. These like over-the-top attacks with each character having their own brand of Mystic Art. But yeah.
And I think lastly was the phone slots of your arts.
Yeah.
Which I liked. I like how it made your arts more powerful, and you can like put certain gems to make them more effective in certain things, like more damage or able to lift enemies or push them at a certain distance. Like that was cool.
Dungeon wise, Tales of the Abyss was pretty standard. Nothing really stand out, but I don't really remember any dungeon bothering me. Oh wait, there was one dungeon. It was the final dungeon, but it wasn't because of the dungeon. It was because of the boss fight you have with Sylph. I think that's his name.
Or do you mean Sync?
Yeah, Sync, yeah. He's really, really annoying.
Was he? I don't remember. I haven't played in a while.
I just remember having such a hard time fighting him at the final dungeon.
Yeah, he might have probably been like super strong at that point. Like they probably boosted his stats like crazy.
But yeah, besides that, I don't remember any annoying parts to Abyss's dungeon.
I think the world map is a slog though.
Oh yeah.
The world
Pretty
map
slow.
is terrible.
Yeah.
and the camera moves super slow, and the enemies move super fast, and then whenever an enemy spots you, you move so much slower, and then you're probably gonna get caught.
And I remember there being pretty annoying bits of backtracking in this game.
Yeah, I remember I did a second playthrough, and it actually bothered me more the second time around because, like, you're revisiting towns so much.
Yeah.
Like, I can't even count how many times like I had to go to Grand Kokma. I think you go to Grand Kokma alone like 10 times in the whole in the main story alone. Like, this is something I didn't really realize my first playthrough because I mean I was only in high school, so I didn't really pay attention to things like that. But when I got older and I played it again, I'm like, wow, I'm going to so many. You even go to you even revisit some dungeons. Like, it gets kind of annoying. Thankfully, they give your airship autopilot at some points, so that makes navigation so much easier. But like, yeah, you backtrack way more in this game than any other Tales game.
Yep. I guess, yeah. I guess you could call it Tales of Xillia 2 a backtrack.
Yeah.
Game. But it's its own thing. Like, you go to each area once in Tales of Xillia 2, but it's kind of called backtracking since you already went to these areas in Xillia 1. But it isn't like Abyss where you're going to the same area over and over again in short intervals.
Right. So you just get sick of seeing the same towns over again. And dungeons too, so.
The music? I thought it was
I was about to say that. It's not bad.
I think Abyss. I think the boss theme is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think Abyss's soundtrack stands out for the battle themes and the boss themes. I think those are the standout tracks of that game. My favorite battle theme in the game is the one that plays in Act 2 after Xeriuth.
Oh yeah.
That was really good. And the one where we fight the God Generals was really awesome.
Yeah.
Awkward Justice.
And I think that's all for Abyss, right?
Yeah, that I can think of.
You want to add anything more for us?
No, I think I'm good. I mean, I didn't really like. I thought the camera angles was. I think the camera thing was slow too. I mean, pretty much what you guys said, I'm in agreement with. Which is one of the reasons I don't like the game. But I like the story though. I don't particularly like the gameplay part.
I think we're already at an hour and a half to 2 hours. You just want to save the rest of the games for at a later date?
Yeah, because we still got a lot of games to cover.
Yeah.
I was gonna say too, we don't want to make this video. It'd be like what, 5 hours long?
Yeah. Okay, so I guess that's the end of the podcast since I guess we talked more about Symphonia, Symphonia 2, Legendia, Abyss, a bit longer than I thought, but yeah. This is part 1 of the Tales podcast.
Well, I was gonna say before we end it, I didn't say a whole lot in this one because there's a lot of games I really didn't get a chance to finish or I didn't like.
But hey, he get to talk more the next part, I think. Because he did play Xillia.
I did play a lot of those, so.
But yeah, that's all for today's episode of Sirus Gaming Corner. Tales discussion part 1. I hope you guys enjoy it. This is Peter47890 Cyrus signing off.
Peace out, everyone.
Later.